We'll now start the statement on Sudan. Foreign Secretary.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I want to update the House on the situation in Sudan. On Tuesday night, I returned from the border between Sudan and Chad, where I witnessed the devastating human toll of the world's worst humanitarian crisis. And from the camp in Adre of 140,000 people, 85% of them women and children, who have fled the most horrendous violence and violations. In January, Sudan passed 1,000 days of conflict between the Sudanese armed forces and the Rapid Support Forces, a regionalised conflict of power, proxies and profit, defined by unimaginable atrocities, by millions pushed into famine, and by the horrific use of rape as a weapon of war, and by suffering that should strike at the core of our shared humanity, that should mobilise the world's resources and resolve, and yet too often the response we've seen is to hold back and look away, catastrophically failing the people of Sudan and failing Sudan's women and girls. I am determined that we do not look away, determined that we put the spotlight firmly on Sudan. That is why I travelled to the region to see firsthand the extent of the crisis, to listen to the testimony of traumatised women and children whose lives will never be the same again, to see how UK support is making a difference, but also to see what urgently needs to be done by the international community to help arrest the spiral of bloodshed and to drive urgent momentum towards peace. In Adre, I met families who had been torn apart, mothers who had survived appalling violence only to find their daughters missing, and frightened children who had travelled vast distances in search of some semblance of safety. I met teachers, nurses, students, market traders, small businesswomen and political activists, impressive women whose lives and livelihoods back home had been stolen from them. A mother separated from her children who told me she still doesn't know where they are and whether they are alive. A young woman who told me that most of the women she knew had been through bad violence on their journey, but they wouldn't talk about it because of the shame. And a Sudanese community worker who told me she thought more than half of the women in the camp had directly experienced sexual assault or abuse. And I've heard from others in recent weeks, including a Sudanese emergency response room worker who described 3 sisters arriving at their response room who had all been raped. The oldest was 13 and the youngest was 8. This is a war waged on the bodies of women and girls. But here's what I also saw: an incredible group of Sudanese women who have set up a makeshift support centre for women who have suffered sexual violence and for children with trauma. They've got activities for children, support for mums, but more survivors need that kind of help. So this week, I announced that the UK will fund a new £20 million pound programme to support survivors of rape and sexual violence in Sudan, enabling them to access medical and psychological care given the terrible stigma endured by survivors and children born of rape. Part of our international action to tackle a global emergency of violence against women and girls. But what I didn't see in Adre is just as disturbing. The fathers, husbands and brothers missing, either killed or drawn into fighting or migrating further and leaving family behind. Reports from El Fasher after the RSF attacks were of atrocities so appalling they could be seen from space, with blood-soaked sand, multiple piles of bodies, mass graves, and aid agencies are still facing barriers to get in. We've seen reports of the SAF refusing to let desperately needed humanitarian aid through, even though right now some 30 million people need life-saving assistance due to this war, and up to 7 million face famine. That is nearly the equivalent to the entire population of London, every person across the entire city that we stand in today. In December, the UK provided an additional £21 million for food, shelter and health services, and we have committed £146 million to support over 800,000 people this year alone. Since the conflict began, we've reached over 2.5 million people, delivering water and medicine to hard-to-reach areas. And we will continue to make Sudan a top priority for UK humanitarian support. And we will support reforms such as the steps advocated by UN Humanitarian Chief Tom Fletcher and the International Rescue Committee to strengthen the prioritisation and closer work through local partners on the ground. Yet for aid to save more lives, the deliberate barriers to humanitarian access must be lifted. Because aid alone won't solve this crisis. We need an immediate and urgent ceasefire. We need those responsible for the atrocities to be held to account, and we need a pathway to peace. There is no military solution to the conflict, only devastation for Sudan. Yet the military men driving this conflict are still refusing to agree a truce. And there is disturbing evidence that they are seeking and getting hold of ever more dangerous weapons. This crisis is being compounded by regional rivalries and vested interests, with the real risk of further escalation within Sudan and beyond as fighting spreads to the Kordofan regions. And I am very fearful that the RSF advances on the city of El Obeid risk turning it into another El Fasher. Coordinated and determined international pressure are needed to halt this bloodshed and pursue an immediate truce. A halt to the arms flows, tangible pressure from all those who have backed the RSF and SAF or who have influence upon them to deliver a ceasefire, and pressure from the entire international community too. The US has been working intensively to secure a truce, drawing together other Quad countries, the United Arab Emirates, Saudi Arabia and Egypt, discussing humanitarian support, military withdrawal, civilian transition and action to stop arms flows. And I'm in close contact with all members of the Quad, including Secretary Rubio, and with the President's senior advisor on Africa, as we urgently push for a way forward. And the UK is particularly involved in a process to support Sudanese civilians to build their capacity. African partners in the region also have a critical role. And in Addis Ababa earlier this week, I met with foreign ministers from Ethiopia, Kenya, South Sudan, Chad, and the African Union's Chairperson and Peace and Security Commissioner to discuss what more can be done by border countries and their assessment of the action needed to achieve a ceasefire. Because we need to build the same focus and momentum on a peace process for Sudan as we had last year around Gaza, with countries from across the world coming together to back a ceasefire, and that is why I am so determined that the UK will keep the international spotlight on Sudan. This month, the UK holds the presidency of the United Nations Security Council. We will use it to press for safe, unimpeded humanitarian access, accountability for atrocities, and international cooperation for a ceasefire. And we will use it to make sure the voices of Sudan's women are heard in the Security Council chamber. And as we look to the third anniversary of this devastating conflict in April, the UK and Germany will jointly convene a major international conference on Sudan in Berlin. In November, UK leadership at the UN Human Rights Council secured international agreement to an urgent UN inquiry into crimes in El Fasher, following its capture by the RSF. And later this month, we will receive the report of that UN fact-finding mission. Because as well as pursuing peace, we must also hold the perpetrators to account. And today I can announce new action on the UK that the UK is taking to apply pressure deliberately on the belligerents. Fresh sanctions targeting senior figures in the SAF and RSF who have committed atrocities across Sudan. We are also targeting a network of individuals operating behind the scenes to procure weapons and recruit mercenary fighters. These designations send a clear message. The UK will hold accountable those suspected of perpetrating and profiteering from the most egregious violations of international law. To look away from crises such as Sudan is not just against our values, it's against our interests, because wars that rage unresolved cause harm not to civilians, and their destabilising effects ripple through across borders and continents through migration and extremism. So let 2026 be the year the world listens to the women of Sudan, not the military men who are perpetuating this conflict. And let 2026 be the year the world comes together to drive urgent new momentum for peace. I commend this statement to the House.
I call Shadow Foreign Secretary Dame Priti Patel.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The situation in Sudan is serious and deadly. Across this chamber, we all want to see this awful, barbaric war end. Millions are suffering, displaced and malnourished. An estimated 150,000 people have been killed, including in massacres such as El Fasher. War crimes are being committed and appalling acts of sexual violence being perpetrated against women and girls. UK leadership is needed to make a difference to the humanitarian situation on the ground and also to support every international diplomatic effort to end this awful and deadly conflict. But I do have to ask the Foreign Secretary, how can she come to the House to talk about such barbaric sexual violence against women and girls when the Prime Minister knowingly let his friend and a friend of one of the most notorious paedophiles, Peter Mandelson, into the heart of government and her department? Is she not ashamed and concerned that our country's credibility and record on this issue has now been damaged because of the government's poor judgment and the Prime Minister's judgment in appointing Mandelson, knowing his links to Epstein? With Mandelson putting his interests first, has she assessed the damage his actions have caused to the UK's international and reputational interests, including on our essential work to address the situation in Sudan? To her knowledge, did he at any stage mislead our US ally on national security and foreign affairs, on key decisions such as Chagos, which impact our security partnership? This morning, and I'm sure she would have seen the reports, that Secretary Rubio warned the Labour government over the appointment of Lord Mandelson. Can she confirm whether she or her predecessor were aware of this? The UK's credibility has been damaged by the Prime Minister and her government's appalling judgment, and that is why answers are needed. Madam Deputy Speaker, this week the UK assumed the presidency of the UN Security Council. So can the Foreign Secretary tell the House how we will use this position to rightly advance efforts to negotiate to end this conflict? US-led peace efforts are reportedly building momentum, with text of a plan to try and stop the fighting being prepared. Has the Foreign Secretary seen and inputted into that text? What are her views on it? Has she set parameters to decide if the proposals are the right ones? Has she spoken with other Sudan Quad countries about it? And if acceptable, what pressures will be put on the warring parties to agree it? What is her assessment of any progress made since the statement at last April's Sudan conference in London, and who will participate in the conference with Germany? We absolutely welcome the new sanctions on the RSF and the SAF, and can we expect further action against the leaders of these barbaric groups, their key operators, enforcers, who are all responsible for administering the vile brutality on innocent people in different parts of the country? We all back the sanctions, which were announced in December, but of course we need stronger action with robust consequences that deters the entities, individuals and businesses whose support continue to sustain this awful war. Can the Foreign Secretary update us on how the UK is using the international courts to pursue those responsible for these atrocities being committed and to gather evidence? Of course, we note the 20 million of humanitarian funding announced by the government for women and girls. So will she confirm whether this is being money drawn from that's already pledged, or whether it is additional new funding that's being announced? And can she confirm which organisations are providing the programmes funded by this money and the mechanisms on how the support service will work, as well as supporting women and girls affected by this sexual violence and the stigma attached to children born from rape? Is she also working to help male victims, where there is also stigma attached that prevents them from coming forward? More broadly, can she update us on the volume of British aid that has managed to get over the border since the escalation of this awful conflict towards the end of last year? And what information has she received on what aid is getting through, and is it getting into the right hands? Madam Deputy Speaker, the war in Sudan is a stain on the world's conscience. Britain has to use every ounce of its influence and leverage to exert its fullest influence to get the warring parties to lay down their weapons immediately and to secure a lasting peace.
Foreign Secretary.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Can I welcome the Shadow Foreign Secretary's words on Sudan? It is the worst humanitarian crisis in the 21st century, and the whole House should be united in wanting this crisis to end. She asked about the work that is being done through the Quad and the work that is being done led by the US. I'm in very close contact with the US Special Envoy, Masad Boulos, and I have also keep in close contact with Secretary Rubio on this issue, and also been involved in discussions with the UAE, with Egypt and with Saudi Arabia as well. There is a lot of work being pursued by the Quad, but linked to that, the UK and Norway are also pursuing further work, particularly to build civilian capacity, because what we all want to see is this move towards a civilian transition, a political transition, but that means we need to build up the capacity of Sudanese civilians who have faced the most horrendous devastation and had to flee their homes as a result of this conflict, and they need support as well. But as I've also said in the statement, we also believe that this has to be an international effort, in the same way that there was in the run-up to the Gaza ceasefire, where there was the work by the Arab League to say that Hamas should play no role, the work by the UK, France and other countries to recognise the state of Palestine, the work by different countries to put forward potential reform plans during the summer, that ultimately all of which was drawn upon by the 20-point plan put together by the US and by President Trump last year. But we need that same intensity with the same level of international engagement around Sudan. That is what I want to see, and that is why I spoke to so many of the African foreign ministers in neighbouring countries this week. It's why I've also been speaking to the African Union, and it's why I will be raising it not just in the UN Security Council as part of our holding of the chair this month, but also at the Munich Security Conference, also as part of the Berlin conference as well. So we will keep the focus and the energy around Sudan, because it is crucial that we do so. The 20 million that we have announced this week is new money going forward, particularly for the survivors of sexual violence as well. She also raised the issue around Peter Mandelson. As the House will know, I withdrew Peter Mandelson from his role as ambassador to the United States. That was less than a week after being appointed as Foreign Secretary, and I'm clear that his actions were completely unforgivable. And given that the heart of what Epstein did was the grave abuse and trafficking of women and girls, that makes this particularly disturbing. And I would say something else as well, that I was the Chief Secretary at the height of the financial crisis, when what I saw was everybody busting a gut to rescue the savings and the livelihoods of ordinary people across this country. And the idea that a senior and experienced cabinet minister alongside us could instead be behaving the way that we have seen is truly shocking, and it is right that a police investigation is underway.
Anneliese Dodds.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I'm very grateful for her impactful visit and also for the sanctions that she's just announced today. Earlier this week, the APPG for Sudan and South Sudan met with the civilian coalition Samud. They stressed that, just as she did, it's civilians who are often delivering humanitarian assistance, and it was civilians, of course, who were ejected from government by the two generals who are currently slogging it out at the expense of thousands upon thousands of slaughtered civilians and millions of hungry and displaced civilians. She talked about the UK and Norway being focused on developing civilian capacity, but would she agree with me this can't be a separate track to what the Quad are doing? Civilian voices must be involved in peace processes, because we can't see an empowerment of the generals who caused this crisis in the first place if civilians aren't engaged in what the Quad are doing now. Thank you.
Secretary.
Can I welcome my right honourable friend's points on this, and also pay tribute to the bravery of Sudanese civilians, and especially those who continue to run the emergency response rooms providing incredibly urgently needed support for desperate people in Sudan as well. She is right, this has to be a central part of the peace process, and in fact it is members of the Quad who have specifically asked us to play this role as part of the peace process, but that's also what I was discussing this week with the African Union, because we believe this can also only be done, this support for civilians can also only be done with the neighbouring border countries in Africa and also with the African Union as well.
Liberal Democrat spokesperson Monica Harding.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Sudan is the world's biggest humanitarian crisis, and I welcome the increased funding and the sanctions, which are long overdue. But why do these sanctions still fall short of EU action, and why do they still fail to target the heads of either the SAF or the RSF? Why has it taken this long? Will the government now target those profiting from Sudan's gold trade, which continues to bankroll the war economy? Humanitarian aid must flow freely and independently. In its role as the United Nations Security Council penholder, what steps is the government taking to secure a ceasefire so that humanitarian aid can get through, and to expand the arms embargo beyond Darfur to the whole country? Will the government expand its aid provision and ensure that aid delivery, including from UK taxpayers from my own constituency of Esher and Walton, is distributed through the UN and INGOs or to the localised efforts like the emergency response rooms, and that the UN system is not undermined? I welcome the steps the UK has taken to ensure Sudanese pro-democracy actors are not sidelined by external power brokers. Will she reaffirm the UK's commitment to a civilian, non-military end state in Sudan? What is being done to prevent parallel diplomatic tracks from undermining UN-led peace efforts? Will the government suspend arms exports to the United Arab Emirates, giving credible evidence of its role in fuelling the conflict? What discussions has the UK held with partners to ensure that humanitarian assistance is not being used to mask responsibility? And how will accountability for atrocities be safeguarded with any peace process supported by the UK, including support for the international justice mechanisms like the International Criminal Court? The UK has a long legacy in Sudan, and with that comes responsibility. Sudan's civilians cannot wait. I urge the government to act with ever more urgency and focus.
Foreign Secretary.
Can I also thank the honourable member for her commitment to reaching peace in Sudan, and her comments on the horrendous nature of the crisis there as well. On the sanctions issues, the sanctions that we have now issued bring us broadly in line with the EU. The US has gone further, so we are continuing to look at these issues as well, and also seeking to link these sanctions that we issue both to the evidence around the atrocities that we have seen, also to some of the evidence around the arms flows, and crucially to the peace process and the peace discussions that we want to see going forward. I agree with her about the importance of the UN, and I met with the UN Secretary-General just a few weeks ago and the UN Emergency Coordinator, Tom Fletcher, exactly to discuss Sudan and the importance of the work that the UN is doing. The UN are also in close touch with the Quad around these discussions and pressing for much greater humanitarian access as well. We certainly need to move this to a civilian government. We need a political transition and a process to get there, but this has to start with the humanitarian truce. We have to start with silencing the guns, and we need, as part of that, an end to the arms flows. And I've seen evidence of a whole series of countries being involved in the arms flows to different sides. We need action against that.
Blair Anderson.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I thank the Foreign Secretary for her statement, for her visit, for the new announcement of new money and the sanctions as well. Children are being deliberately and systematically targeted by both sides in this conflict. Boys forcibly recruited, girls subject to sexual violence, even infants raped. Can she confirm that what we have seen during this conflict are not some spontaneous acts of violence by the warring parties, but an orchestrated, industrial-scale use of rape as a weapon of war deliberately designed to strike fear into the civilian population? And can she confirm that she can ensure that women are at the table during the peace negotiations?
Foreign Secretary.
Well, I agree with my honourable friend. I've had the most disturbing stories of the impact of all of this on children. Mums who described how their children just stay in their tents. They are terrified to go out even though they have reached the relative safety of the camp because of everything that has happened to them. And also we've heard terrible stories of young children also being raped and facing the most horrendous sexual assaults as well. So I strongly agree with her. We have to pursue not just the peace, but also to hold to account those who have inflicted these atrocities on children.
David Mundell.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And I really commend the Foreign Secretary's proactive engagement with Parliament on this issue, because it's part of the way that we are going to shine a light on these horrendous circumstances. And can I also concur with the Right Honourable lady from Oxford East about the importance of civilian engagement, and that any ceasefire is linked to the development of a political process, and that perhaps also there can be civilian engagement at the Berlin conference. But could she say a little bit more about how she intends to engage the African Union? Because there is a general view that if the African Union were more engaged, it would be a lot harder for Russia to veto Security Council resolutions.
Well, I completely agree with him about civilian engagement, and can assure him that we would plan for civilian voices to be heard in the discussions at the UN Security Council, where I strongly believe we need to hear the voices of Sudanese women, but also as part of the Berlin conference as well. But he asked specifically about the African Union. That was something I made a priority. It was one of the reasons that I went to Addis Ababa to meet with both the head of the African Union and other representatives in order to discuss exactly how we can work with the African Union, and also how other neighbouring foreign ministers can all work together. They all desperately want to see peace in Sudan, because they can also see the destabilising effect of what is happening in Sudan on their countries and on right across the region as well. So yes, we need strongly to work with the African Union too.
Rachel Maskell.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I say to the Foreign Secretary that is the most powerful statement this House has heard on Sudan over the 1,000 days that we've had, and I thank her for all of her work in this area. However, we know that this war is being fuelled by external actors with an interest for their own profligacy in Sudan. So can she say how she will engage with those actors, many of which we have trading relationships, what leverage she will use to ensure that they withdraw their weapons, and also the supply of mercenaries into Sudan, which are also fuelling this conflict?
Secretary.
Well, my honourable friend is right that external countries and actors are helping to fuel this conflict by support that they are providing to the warring parties. That has to end. And the reason that the warring parties are refusing to accept what everybody knows to be the case, which is that there is no military solution to this war, is because they keep thinking that they can still secure additional weapons, additional advantage as well. And that is why an end to the arms flow has to be part of this process, and is why we are raising this and discussing this in all of the international discussions as well.
Clive Jones.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. How is the government engaging directly with Sudanese civilian coalitions, including the SAMU coalition, to ensure their proposals inform international mediation efforts?
What I can tell him is that we are engaging directly with a range of different civilian groups and seeking to provide support and bring them together. We are working with Norway to do this. This work is still at an early stage, although we have kept close contact with civilian groups throughout this process, we are now seeking, alongside the work of the Quad, to draw up a stronger process for the future to help build that capacity among civilian groups, because it is needed if we're to get a transition to a civilian government.
Nick Smith.
Madam Deputy Speaker, could I say how great it was to see the Foreign Secretary was in Chad this week in support of Sudanese refugees, and can I particularly support her remarks on page 1 of her statement today, where she says, "I am determined that we do not look away." Can she please tell us more about our UK efforts to get our humanitarian aid to the millions who need it?
Foreign Secretary.
My honourable friend is exactly right to say this, because we cannot look away, and I fear it has been too easy for the international community, for people across the world, to look away, and particularly to look away from the plight of women and girls and the way in which rape has been used as a weapon of war. That's particularly why we are announcing this dedicated funding for survivors of sexual violence, but this is part of over 140 million we are providing for Sudan, and ensuring that this reaches local groups and organisations who can also better deliver support on the ground.
Stephen Geppings.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Can I thank the Foreign Secretary for her statement? Can I thank her for her travel and the prominence that she's given this issue? And can I especially thank her for her engagement with the victims of the conflict, not least women and girls? I want to say thank you. On the issue, I welcome the issue around sanctions, but obviously sanctions on state, non-state and individuals has to be a dynamic process. Can she assure us that she will engage with the civilians affected by conflict, with civil society who have worked on this issue for a long time, and also will she engage with this Parliament, because so many people across the Chamber have been engaging on this issue for a long time? Thank you.
Foreign Secretary.
The simple answer I can give him is yes, I will, and we will continue to look at the issue of sanctions, to continue to look at what more we can do, and we will certainly continue to engage not just with the House, but with anybody and everybody who has evidence that can help support that process.
Patricia Ferguson.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and can I thank the Foreign Secretary for such a strong statement this afternoon. The Foreign Secretary has rightly highlighted the disgraceful use of rape as a weapon of war in this conflict, but of course it happens in many other conflicts around the world, from Ukraine to Myanmar. So can I urge the Foreign Secretary to use her office to lead international efforts to bring the perpetrators of this disgraceful violence against women and girls to justice, wherever that violence may be happening, and no matter how long the process takes?
Secretary.
Well, I completely agree with my honourable friend. It was 25 years ago that the UK led the drawing up of the Women, Peace and Security resolution at the United Nations. And since then, successive governments have highlighted the issues around violence against women and girls. But I want to ensure that that is at the heart of our foreign policy, not just in Sudan, but more widely. Although it has been devastating to hear one aid worker who told me that although she's worked on conflicts for 20 years, she has experience of dealing with sexual violence in conflicts for very many years. This was by far the worst, when she talked to all of the women arriving at this camp and said that it felt like almost every one of them had a terrible story to tell of sexual violence.
Bob Blackman.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Over the last 2.5 years, there's hardly been a week when we've not had an urgent question, a statement or a debate on the situation in Gaza. Yet the situation in Sudan has often been overlooked, despite the fact that at least 3 times the level of people being killed in Sudan greater than Gaza. I welcome the Foreign Secretary's statement. However, the key here is obviously ensuring that an arms embargo exists across the world. I wonder if she can update the House on how many of our allies have agreed to such an arms embargo, and what action is going to be taken to those, frankly, that are not our allies, to try and prevent those arms getting into Sudan.
Secretary.
Well, thank the honourable member for his question. And I think the energy that we have had around Gaza and the work that took place last summer was really important, and has helped to achieve what is still a fragile ceasefire, but is a ceasefire nevertheless, and a peace process that is moving forward. But we need that same urgency and intensity on Sudan. It needs to be global. We need the same sense of international countries coming together. That's why we will continue to maintain the spotlight. And then what I can tell him is that issues around restricting and preventing arms flows have been central to many of the discussions, the international discussions taking place, and also some of the discussions in the Quad, where they have made commitments as well about ending arms flows and ending those from neighbouring parties as well. So, but my personal belief is that there is much more work to do in this area. The number of countries that have been involved in these arms flows means that much more work still needs to be done.
Joanna Baxter.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I thank the Secretary of State for her statement today and shining a light on the horrendous suffering of women and girls in Sudan. Does she agree with me? Rape should never be used as a weapon of war, and to use rape against children is a heinous crime. Children have special protected status under international law. Will she pursue the perpetrators in the international courts, and can she say more about the rehabilitation support that we will be providing to those children?
My honourable friend is right to refer to the truly horrendous crimes of rape against children, rape that has been taking place against young girls and young boys, and rape that causes the deep trauma not just at the time the crime is being committed, but for many, many years to come. So that is why we want to support some of the work that I've seen being done on a very small scale already to provide support for children and for mothers who have been victims of sexual violence. But we want to go much further, making sure that there is psychological support and practical support for those who've been victims of these terrible crimes.
Ben Lake.
Can I also thank the Foreign Secretary for her statement today, and particularly thank her for her engagement with the African Union and regional partners. I know that she will be concerned of the possibility of wider and broader destabilisation as a consequence of this conflict, and in light of reports that of renewed clashes in the Blue Nile state and the mobilisation of armed groups in the southern and western parts of that state, can I ask her what is the view of Ethiopia and South Sudan on the actions that are needed to be taken to limit the destabilisation, and what role, if any, can the UK government offer to support them?
Well, the honourable member is exactly right to raise the risks around the destabilisation, the impact not just on the Blue Nile area that he referred to. We've also seen Chad soldiers being killed in Chad as a result of incursions over the border. And what many of the foreign ministers I spoke to, including the Ethiopian and South Sudan foreign minister, was their deep concern that also that vacuums can also be exploited by extremists as well, and so therefore the regional destabilisation is a significant risk that they are concerned about. So we discussed exactly how the foreign ministers across the region could work together. Their understanding and expertise on some of the dynamics within Sudan are also crucial to the peace process, and they were all keen to be part of those discussions as well.
Adam Jurgey.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. I know the Sudanese diaspora in Staffordshire and Newcastle Line particularly will welcome the statement today, and I thank the Foreign Secretary for her leadership and for travelling to the region, because we have to be seen to be believed. Now, the programme and the sanctions announced are to be welcome, because we must do whatever we can to end the murders, the evil and the bloodshed, and that's why I'm pleased the Foreign Secretary met with the African Union Regional Foreign Minister, something that I've been pushing alongside other colleagues for several months on these issues, and for unpicking those conversations. But can she, and she's mentioned Germany and Norway, but can she further unpick what our European allies, France, Italy, Spain, Ireland and the rest are doing to help us end this war?
Foreign Secretary.
Yes, and my honourable friend is right. This has to be very much an international issue. I have discussed this directly with at the G7, which includes the France, Germany and Italy, also directly with the French Foreign Minister, and we are also planning now for the Berlin conference to involve many European countries as well as internationally. And he will know that the Norwegians have also had a long history of work in Sudan and also to support civilians as well. So there has to be a strong engagement from every continent.
Greg Smith.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The Foreign Secretary rightly spoke of the need to halt arms flows, and I listened very carefully to her answer to my honourable friend for Harrow East earlier. So can I focus on one specific country? There's significant evidence of use of Chinese-manufactured arms, such as the FH-95 strategic drone in Sudan. How much time was dedicated to raising this with the Chinese during the Prime Minister's recent visit to China? Has she spoken to her Chinese counterparts on this matter? And what reassurance can she give the House that this hasn't become an inconvenient truth in the government's attempt to reset the relationship with China?
Foreign Secretary.
Well, what I can say to the honourable member is that we believe that there's a whole range of countries now that have been involved in some way in the arms flows. That includes in manufacture and sale, it includes in purchasing and financing, and includes in transit routes as well. So there are a whole range of countries involved. We continue to raise this in all of our international engagement. I'm particularly concerned about some of the use of drones, for example, and some of the more serious weapons that are now increasingly, there is evidence of them being procured in order for use in Sudan. So we are continuing to pursue this, and we're pursuing this with every nation.
Thank
you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and can I thank the Foreign Secretary for her statement and the sanctions announced today. Her account is absolutely devastating in terms of the impact on civilians. Over 21 million people facing high levels of acute food insecurity and 9.5 million internally displaced. So can she say what representation she continues to make to parties to the conflict to secure that unhindered humanitarian access, and particularly for those neighbouring countries that are facing destabilisation?
Foreign Secretary.
My honourable friend is right. We will continue to maintain the pressure because there has to be access. There does also have to be continuing support as well, and that is why one of the issues that we will discuss in the run-up to the Berlin conference is how we ensure that there is funding as well for the humanitarian support that is needed. One of the things that I heard from people that I spoke to earlier this week was just the families going hungry still, and nobody should go hungry in the 21st century.
Dr. Ellie Chowns.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I'd like to thank the Foreign Secretary very much for her statement today, for her visit, for the new sanctions and aid that she's announced, and for her clear personal passion about keeping the spotlight on the horrific suffering of women and children in particular in this conflict, and her clear determination to bring together the international community and do what this country can to reach a ceasefire. I'd like to draw her attention specifically to the role of gold in financing the conflict. It is reported that gold production since the war began has grown more than tenfold, and that the vast majority of that is being smuggled out of the country and illicitly financing the arms imports that are fueling the conflict. Countries involved include cross-border flows to Egypt and to the UAE. So can I ask her, what concrete measures is the UK taking, diplomatic, regulatory, sanctions, with partners, including those two countries, to highlight, call attention to and stop the role of illicit gold trade in fueling this horrific conflict?
Well, the honourable member is right to raise these issues because one of the issues that we discussed, and we held an event to discuss with a group of foreign ministers and also ambassadors from a range of the neighbouring countries all around Sudan. And one of the things we discussed was the economics of the conflict and the dangers of allowing a conflict to take such deep root over an extended period of time that too many people, too many players in this process end up profiting from a vile conflict that is destroying lives, and therefore that part of the response, part of the peace process has to be to target those routes for profit as well as the routes for arms flows in order to properly bring this conflict to a close.
Sonia Kumar.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The situation in Sudan is deplorable. Sadly, as too common, women and girls are being terrorised and rape is being used as a weapon of war. The United Nations has horrifically reported infants as young as 1 being raped. This is hell on earth. The Secretary of State mentions she's working with our African partners. Can she discuss what healthcare support will be provided to the women and girls from medical age to paediatric care for those children born from rape?
I thank my honourable friend for this question, because I do think that sexual violence in conflict has too often been ignored, and it has been too easy to turn away from the women and from the children who are the victims of these truly horrendous crimes. And we're determined to ensure that is not the case. I also visited in both Ethiopia and Chad some of the clinics and support services for victims of sexual violence, and some of the other services that the UK continues to provide support and funding for as well. And we need to make sure that those services can also be provided for the victims in Sudan.
Dr Al Pinkerton.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And can I thank the Foreign Secretary for her statement this morning. Nobody can fail to be moved by the horrific tales from Adre. As the Foreign Secretary has also said, accountability is absolutely crucial. But a future ICC court case relies on incredibly hard work being done now in order to secure witness statements, to preserve digital files, to build structured casework, and to have strict and disciplined chain of custody mechanisms put in place. All of that requires skill and expertise on the front line. So can I ask the Foreign Secretary, what is the UK doing to support that international effort to preserve now, to verify now, in order to make a future court case possible and to hold those perpetrating these appalling crimes truly accountable?
Can I welcome the honourable member's question? This is incredibly important, and it's exactly why in November at the Human Rights Council, the UK led a resolution to establish a fact-finding mission into El Fasher, and to be able to send in the teams to be able to pursue and gather exactly that kind of evidence. We're expecting their fact-finding report back before the end of the month, so while the UK, while we continue to hold the chair of the UN Security Council, it will inform our discussions. I don't know yet what it will have found and how much progress they will have managed to make, but I fear that from everything we have seen so far, its conclusions are likely to be truly damning and disturbing.
Mayor Ellis.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I greatly welcome the statement today and the actions the government has taken in response to the conflict in Sudan, including sanctions against individuals linked to the most horrendous atrocities and sexual violence. The situation in Sudan is a devastating reminder of how often sexual violence against women and girls is used in both conflict and in peacetime. And as a relative newcomer to this place, I'm still very, very concerned that across the world we still don't treat violence against women and girls as a deal breaker it should be. So can she assure me that this government will always consider a country's attitude to girls and young women in wider diplomatic engagement with international partners, including when negotiating trade deals?
Foreign Secretary.
So I agree with my honourable friend about the way in which the violence against women and girls has too often been discounted, too often people look away. We need to ensure that is not the case. That is why I have been clear that violence against women and girls, and also more widely issues around equality for women, should be central to our foreign policy, to UK foreign policy and the discussions that we have across the world. It's also why, as you will know, we have a domestic ambition and mission to halve violence against women and girls. We are now working with other countries to work globally to share experience, how we work together to tackle what is not just a national emergency but a global emergency too.
Seamus Logan.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And I want to salute the Foreign Secretary's commitment and passion on this topic and congratulate her on her recent efforts. She has already mentioned the UK's role now as the pen holder at the UN Security Council. And with this in mind, I'm sure she'll agree with me that without the inclusion of Sudanese civic society, a long-term peaceful and democratic resolution simply cannot be achieved. But I must ask the Foreign Secretary, is she planning to support the African Union-led Quintet initiative involving multilateral organisations, including the UN, to bring together Sudanese political parties and civil society to agree a joint position on a peaceful, civilian-led political transition, and if so, what steps she is taking to support this?
Foreign Secretary.
I welcome the honourable member's question. That is exactly why I had meetings directly with the African Union to make sure that the work to support civic society is done with involving the work that they are doing locally and also involves neighbouring countries directly as well. He's also completely right to say if this simply becomes an ongoing standoff between two military-led parties, we will not get a secure and sustainable peace for Sudan. The first stage has to be the humanitarian truce, but we have to have that civilian transition.
Ayub Khan.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Can I thank the Foreign Secretary for her statement today, and in particular commend her for her leadership and in specific travelling out to Sudan to see firsthand the atrocities that are being committed in Sudan. We all know that in conflict there will always be innocent civilians that get caught up in crossfire, but the distinction here is that children are specifically being targeted, children being raped as a weapon of war, but also young boys that are kidnapped and then forced to bear arms. We welcome, I'm sure the whole House welcomes the additional support that we're giving in terms of financial aid, and we know that's a drop in the ocean in terms of the challenges faced in Sudan. So can I ask the Foreign Secretary, what more are we doing with our allies to ensure that we can maximise the aid that can get into Sudan? And given that we are now in pole position, presidency of the United Nations Security Council, is there any prospect that we can get UN troops to protect civilian population, in specific children?
Secretary.
So can I welcome the points the honourable member has made about the horrendous way that children are being targeted, and some of this as well. This is children fleeing as well. So some of the really most disturbing reports are children and women who have managed to flee from one of the cities under siege. They are leaving, they are fleeing, they are running away, and yet on those journeys they are stopped and they face rape, sexual violence, kidnapping, and this horrendous, effectively these are crimes, the most terrible crimes that are being committed. So we are working on how we can strengthen the support for children, how we can use not just the UN Security Council work, not just the UN more widely, but any international forum we have to raise the plight of children.
Jim Shannon.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I thank the Foreign Secretary very much for her tone, for her words, and for her obvious empathy and compassion with the Sudanese victims. That's greatly appreciated by us all. UN presence in famine-stricken Kadujli in South Kordofan and remaining in risk zones in Darfur and Kordofan to prevent mass atrocities, widespread sexual violence against women and girls, and to substantially increase UK and international funding to avert catastrophic further loss of life and what the UN describes as the world's largest and most neglected humanitarian crisis. And I think many of us in this House, indeed I believe the Foreign Secretary herself, would say that's exactly the case. Millions displaced, famine confirmed in multiple locations, and over 12 million people in desperate need. Foreign Secretary, what can be done to help the humanitarian, the medical aid that's needed, perhaps even the psychological impact upon those women and girls? Can't begin to try and comprehend that, but I think the Foreign Secretary acknowledges that and understands it better than most.
Can I welcome the honourable member's points on this? One of the disturbing things about El Fasher is that aid agencies said they expected to see thousands of people arriving, fleeing from El Fasher as a result of the siege, and they never arrived. and no one yet knows what happened to so many of the people in El Fasher who didn't arrive at other neighbouring camps and safe places. And I really fear that there is a risk of another El Fasher. I really fear in the Kordofans that if we do not have urgent action to get a ceasefire in place, we will see more of those atrocities take place. And that is why I just continually say it is important that the world hear the voices of the women and children of Sudan and not the military men who are simply perpetuating this war.
And that concludes the statement on Sudan.